Well, let's finish up with our last team, and this is my favorite team in the division, especially for fantasy because there are so many options and so many weapons that I don't think you go wrong with a new offensive coordinator that should increase and yield higher scoring, which is what their problem was last year, and that's the LA Chargers. Last year you had Justin Herbert throwing for 25 passing touchdowns, which was the lowest of his career so far. He was on an upward trajectory from his rookie season to his sophomore to his junior last year, and it fell off the shelf. His passing yardage didn't, and the passing volume didn't. It was the scoring. And the play calling was terrible for that team as well. I've said it, and I'm going to say it again until I'm blue in the face, it's Herbert MVP this year. He's going to throw for 5,000. He's going to throw for 40 touchdowns. He's going to do what Mahomes did last year because he was on the brink of doing it anyway. You know, when you throw for 4,800 yards, you don't throw 30 plus touchdowns, that's not on the quarterback at that point. That's on the play calling and the offensive coordinator. I love Austin Eckler because he's in a contract year. He's going to, the stake of where the contracts are for running backs, I don't know if he's going to even be paid, but you better believe he's going to play his ass off. And he has for the past 2 seasons. I expect him to do it for a third season here. I think he had 20 total touchdowns the year before. He had 18 last year. He's going to be above 15 total touchdowns against this year, which is going to be one of the top, if not the top running backs in the league. And then I love Keenan Allen. He's a tried and true guy. His small sample size, outside of injuries last year, were fantastic. He was putting up great numbers, and his rapport with Herbert is fantastic. The one that kind of sticks for me is Mike Williams. Do I want to go take a chance on him where his ADP is? Or do I want to go with the rookie and upside in Quentin Johnston in the fact that, hey, Mike Williams may be hurt because he's on and off the field a lot. And this rookie's got big playability as well. And that's probably the route I would go in the draft. Stick away from the Mike Williams, take a chance on Quentin Johnston. And then, again, a dart throw tight end. If you fade tight end, Gerald Everett's a great option there too as well. He proved it last year. Finished, I think, tight end 14. He had an injury. He was out for a couple games, but he was on pace to be a tight end 11, I think, at the end of the season, which if you're looking for a dart throw on a guy, that's a perfect opportunity. He was used a lot in scheme plays and the red zone. So.
Yeah, this is, again, I think they're going to be a top 5 offense in the league. I would agree with you. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be an MVP. My dark horse MVP candidate is Aaron Rodgers, but
yeah, I would back that too, but I chose mine.
Yeah, but Herbert, he has all the weapons there, and the biggest thing for me is can this receiving core stay healthy? And if they can stay healthy, and that's what I think hurt Herbert last year on the 27 touchdowns. You saw the yardage just was phenomenal, but I think it really hurt losing Keenan Allen for multiple games, losing Mike Williams for multiple games, and them overlapping on those games, right? Mike Williams comes back is back for 1 week or a couple plays in that game, and then is out again. Having Quentin Johnston, I would agree with you on your rankings, by the way. So I think Keenan Allen has kind of slipped in drafts to where you can get him in the late third, early.
He's going fourth round. Yeah, early fourth
round. And that I think is great value. If I had to rank them based on my value, Keenan Allen's 1 because I still love his value there. Quentin Johnston's 2, and then Mike Williams is 3. Mike Williams is a little bit too rich for me. For the same reasons that you just said. I think that I'd rather take a risk on the rookie who's going to come in, who I can get later in the draft, a couple rounds after Mike Williams, and I don't have to go in and overdraft on Williams if he's proven time and time again he cannot stay healthy, and these soft tissue injuries that keep him out multiple weeks. And Everett I really like too. I think Parham's another guy that he's not going to get drafted, but which is great because if you go and just take a flyer on a tight end late, he might be a waiver wire guy you might add in the first couple weeks of the season and be able to hold on to. But Parham, I think, is an athletic freak, and the whole reason I think Everett stepped it up last year is because Parham was injured and wasn't healthy. So yeah, there's really it's hard for me to look at the depth chart and be like, I don't like this player, right? Like they still like if you look at the backup receivers and Joshua Palmer and Jalen Guyton, like I still like those guys. Like if there were injuries to Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think both those guys are viable options from a fantasy perspective. If Eckler gets hurt, Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller are great fantasy could be great fantasy options there. If Everett is the starter and Parham's a great backup to have there, like there, it's hard for me to look at this depth chart and be like, yeah, like I don't like that guy. Like no, they have talent all across this offense, which is why we think that they're going to be a top 5 offense this year.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those
teams doesn't stay healthy.
Well, I was going to say this is one of those teams that when you look at the depth chart and there's injuries happen, people are pouncing on players from this team. It's not like one of those other ones where it's like, oh, the number 1 running back got hurt and nobody's really like wanting to spend the money and their fab on another running back from that squad.
Gets hurt, like who wants Breda, right?
Exactly. Nobody's going to want to jump on, a backup wide receiver. Like if Devontae Adams gets hurt, is anybody really going to try and jump on one of the Raiders receivers? It's not one of those teams. Like this one has depth across the board and led by a fantastic quarterback who, like, to me, and the reason why I say MVP each time I talk about him, he had 5,000 yards the year before. He had less interceptions last year than he did his 5,000 yard season. So he's already hit his 5,000 yard mark before. But when you look at that offense, this tells you why it's going to go through the roof for them again this year. Last year, the Chargers were the 3rd highest in passing yardage in terms of the NFL. Only the Vikings and Chiefs were above them. Vikings threw for 30 touchdowns. Chiefs threw for 41 touchdowns. Here's the biggest number that it was to me that was alarming was the Chargers had a 6.7 yards per attempt. Nobody besides the Buccaneers, who had Tom Brady, who again threw for 4,000 yards and only 26 touchdowns. Those two teams in the top 10 were 6.7 and 6.3 respectively yards per attempt. You are not going to score many touchdowns. I'm surprised they threw for 4,700. It was purely volume play they threw for over 700 attempts. But if that number is going to 100% go up, especially with Quentin Johnston and the receivers healthy, if they get that number up into the 7 or the 8s where the Dolphins and the Chiefs were, you're going to see 5,000 yards for Herbert for sure, and you're going to see more touchdowns because that number in alone is so tiny. And then the other one was their first down rate. Well, everybody else was 36% or higher in their first down rate, except for the Buccaneers and the Chargers at 30. They were both at 32%. You need to convert first downs.
A little bit misleading
as well.
Too.
I don't think it's as misleading as you think, though. I really don't think you think.
I think. You have 100 receptions from Austin Eckler, right? So
yeah, but you look at Austin Eckler's yards per reception. I'll pull that up for you real quick. Keep talking, but
please do. But I'm just saying, there's at least 100 targets or 100 receptions that are shorter targets, right? And they're dump offs or out of the backfield. But they do that number is kind of a little bit shocking to me because
his yards per reception.
Back on watching the Chargers.
Yeah. Eckler's. Sorry. Go ahead.
If you think back at the games and watching last year, they always seem to be throwing the ball like downfield. And there's a lot of that they didn't connect on, right? You look at like the games when like DeAndre Carter was in there and Josh Palmer was in there, and there's a lot of down the field targets. So to see like a sub 10 yards per reception is a little bit shocking. But
it's yards per attempt. So yeah, but I mean they had a 711 attempts, so it's a ton of attempts. But you look at yards per reception for Eckler, and it was 6.7. So it was that's what it was there. So to me, I think that number should go up big time. Yards per, just because they threw for 711, both teams threw for 700. It should drop it, obviously, just sheer fact that they threw for over 700 passes. But the Bengals threw for 610, 650 for the Chiefs, and they were both at 7.4, and the Chiefs had 8.1 yards per attempt. And to me, the Chiefs weren't airing the ball out either. and the completion percentage was higher for the Chargers, so it wasn't like they just caught more balls. To me, it just comes down to the fact that they ran a lot of tight end screens that weren't that effective. They ran a lot of wide receiver screens with some of those fast guys that weren't effective. They weren't effective with trying to run some screens to Eckler that often as well. So I think that a lot of stuff came down to the fact that they weren't pushing the ball far enough downfield, and a lot of the times it would be like 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and they're throwing a 5-yard play and expecting yards after catch that weren't coming. So that hurt them a lot as well. So I just think if the yards per attempt are that low, that factors in. That factors in. Well, that factors in the 32% of the incomplete passes had to be short passes as well. They weren't deep passes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like I said, like that's hard. That's a number that's hard for me to think of, because like every kind of memory that I have of watching them last season, it was like constant deep shots down the field.
Well, their highlight reel for sure was.
Well, and the problem is, and we've talked about this, and kind of like their play calling is they weren't stepping on the throat of their opponents.
Yeah. Like
they'd get a lead, and they did have some comebacks. They had the comeback against the Colts where they were down 27-0 or 31-0 at halftime, and they came back and won that game. Or was that the Vikings?
That was the Vikings.
The Vikings did that. Yeah, they would get leads in games in first halves and then just never be able to finish them out. And they'd play conservative. It's like the Falcons in the Super Bowl. It's if you're going to play conservative, like, you better get first downs, and then you go on a 3 and out, or you go on, just move the chains once and then have to punt it away. Actually, do you have the numbers in front of you on seeing what their punt rate is on how many times they punted?
I can pull it up.
Because I mean, like, yeah, if they went full throttle and just like hammered their opponent,
they were number 10,
and yeah, so how can you have a top 5 offense you're throwing for almost 5,000 yards and be 10th in the league in punting?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of 2022, they had a 4.3 punt attempts per game, which that's. Everybody's around 3, 4, and some 5. Only a couple 5. That was Houston, Tennessee, and Denver, which makes sense. But I mean, you still 4.3. You were right there with the New York Giants, LA Rams, and Minnesota Vikings, and the Colts. And then at the bottom of the barrel for the least amount, not bottom of the barrel, top of the barrel, least amount, you had Buffalo, Detroit, Kansas City, all at 3.1. And 3.2 for Kansas City, and Philadelphia's 3.3. So it just goes to show it's a whole punt less per game makes a huge difference, and that just goes to that. That just showed that stat I had earlier in terms of,
down conversion,
first down conversion, like first downs percentage in terms of their passes. Their overall first down percentage from all their passes was they had 232 first downs on 485 completions.
Yeah,
they had a 32% first down completion. That was 4 points less than the Vikings, who were ahead of them, and it was almost 10% points less than the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, you're not winning ball games when you're not converting first downs. I mean, the Raiders showed it; they were 32%. The Bucs were 32%.
Well,
the Jets last year were 30%.
Yeah, it's such a difference in comparison. And you look at the teams that were around them in terms of punts per game, and then you look at the elite teams, the really truly elite teams, and look how little that they punt per game.
Yeah,
and that's the difference. Is if you're going to get into that kind of category, if you're going to be considered an elite offense in this league, you can't be punting the ball 3-4 times a game. Like, that's scoring, or at least driving down the field to kick a field goal. Like, and that's the thing is, like, you cannot manage a game conservatively, and you need to be aggressive throughout the entire game, and that's why they lost in the playoffs. You get a 27-point lead against a team, and you blow it because you cannot just go out there. They look at the play call in the second half. They're just running the football and trying to just burn the clock. It's like, no, score again on them and score again. Well,
you said it here. Last year they weren't putting their foot on the throats of their opponents. They were 3rd in the division in points for. And they weren't even third. They weren't even number one in the division in points against. The Raiders were. They were second in the division in points against at 384. So
Swiss cheese defense, Jono. We've established this.
No, I'm not talking about the Raiders. I'm talking about the Chargers themselves. They had 391 points for, 384 points against. They had a 7-point differential, a 1 touchdown differential on the season. Like you're not a good playoff and a championship team when you do that. And when you look at their season and you look at the games that they won a lot of games close, but the games they lost 27-24 to Kansas City. They lost 38-10 to the Jacksonville in week 3. Here's the crazy thing to me. You lost 37-23 to the Seattle, 22-16 to San Fran, 30-27 to Kansas City, and then 27-20 to the Raiders, which was a surprising one to me. I looked at Herbert's stats last year, and this just shows where they're not putting their foot on the throats of their opponents. Herbert did not have a 400-yard game last year at all. Like that to me is the biggest surprising stat. That guy has an arm and has the ability to do it, and they throw for 711 attempts, and he doesn't have one 400-yard game. He has multiple, like almost every game last season, he had a receiver at 90 to 100 yards in the game. Only one game was that Denver game, 19-16 overtime, where the leading receiver had 57 yards. But besides that, somebody had over 100 yards, and he wasn't doing it. And it just goes to show that they were not. It wasn't like Eckler was running for 100 yards a game. He only had 200-yard games last year. Yeah. He had in week 5 and in week 17. So they just weren't pushing the ball downfield, taking shots, and they weren't throwing the ball with like deep playability. And I think that's going to change this year. I say maybe when
we started talking about this team, and I brought it up, is if the big if for this question for this team is, can that receiving core stay healthy? And if they can, this is going to be an elite offense. If they can't, this is where they struggle every year. Is like when you have games that are without Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and this is why you go and draft a receiver. Is receiver the real need? No. But this is why you go and draft a receiver in the first round, because the other two guys there can't stay healthy.
That's true. It's true. I mean, you look at when it comes down to the games where Herbert was under 300 yards passing. He still had Allen, he still had Mike Williams, but like the big ones, like he had 196 against San Fran. Carter was his leading receiver. 238. Palmer was his leading receiver. But he had other ones where it's 212 and it was Mike Williams. But I mean, here's the thing though that you got to like about Herbert and you got to like about this offense. When you go into a wild card match and you do have your receivers with you, the leading receiver in that wild card match was Gerald Everett, 109 receiving yards that game. So he can push the ball around to other people, but I agree, for them to get over the hump and this team to score more points, at least one or both of Allen and Williams need to be healthy for the entire season. They can't have only 6 games played together. You need to have at least 9 games of them playing together. But again, Quentin Johnston kind of fills the void of one of those guys being out, and that's going to help. So
you don't want that.
No, I'm still drafting Keenan Allen like he's not going to be injured. Period. Because I think the guy's fantastic. And I would be drafting Mike Williams too, with the onus that, he's not going to get injured either. I just like the opportunity to draft Quentin Johnston for a guy who plays a similar role, and an opportunity where there may be 3 wide receiver sets out there. They may not even line up. Yeah. So why not have it, take a chance on a guy who's got some big playabilities, a little bit younger. So Vegas has this line. I mean, let's real quick before I talk about Vegas, let's talk about Kellen Moore and the fact that he in the past 2 seasons has brought the Cowboys to top team in the NFL in terms of scoring. That's the other thing that I love to see, is like they're going to find opportunities to score. They're not going to find opportunities to just skate by. I think, if they want to be a premier team in the NFL, they're in a win now mode right now. They've got the players to do it. Kellen Moore could be the guy to tip the scale for them in terms of point scoring. You may see this team who I think the highest point total in a game last year was 34. The highest they scored all season. I could see this getting into the 40s a couple games next year.
Well, this is one of the reasons that I like Quentin Johnston this year too. Is if you look back at like CeeDee Lamb's rookie year,
Mm-hmm.
when uh when he had him there, when you still had Amari Cooper on the other side, if Keenan Allen see Amari Cooper and Mike Williams and Quentin Johnston can step into that second role or step into a slot role, how he used CeeDee Lamb out of the slot is very similar to Quentin Johnston. And I think Quentin Johnston could have a fantastic year this year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rookie receivers that I think are in really good scenarios. And I said early on, like, I think Jordan Addison, if he wasn't living the life fast and furiously, he's in a great scenario. But I think Quentin Johnston is right there with him. And even like Zay Flowers. But like I think there's a lot of guys that rookies can step up, and they're in really good scenarios because they weren't drafted to be the guy. Like you look at Garrett Wilson last year, it's like Garrett Wilson and Olave were drafted to be the guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
These guys weren't. There's already established number ones on those teams. Well, minus Baltimore, but there's two guys ahead of Flowers. But Quentin Johnston isn't coming over and saying, Keenan Allen, like, give me the keys to the car. You're riding shotgun. Like, no, it's Keenan Allen's show there. Mike Williams is still there, so Quentin Johnston can have the time to develop going against lesser coverage. If he's a top talent, he's going against number 2 corners, number 3 corners sometimes. And same thing with Addison in Minnesota. Like, Addison is never going to get the top corner coverage.
Yeah.
And that's why those guys are in really good scenarios. And I think I think Quentin Johnston can be in kind of that CeeDee Lamb role. And yeah, you're right. The Dallas's offense did emerge as a top offense in the league in terms of scoring, but he has the same kind of like, look at Pollard last year and how they use him. Now he has a better Pollard with Eckler.
Yeah.
So I still think, that's why this is why Eckler is going to be the top 2 picks in the draft, or top 3 picks in the draft, because he's going to be used a hell of a lot, and he's a great receiver. Like you look at the offenses that these players, the top players, are being drafted from, and those offenses are good. San Francisco, the Vikings, and the Chargers, they have to be good.
Well, Kellen Moore, just the last note on Kellen Moore here is, and the Chargers. Chargers last year were 12th in points per game. They were 8th in yards per game, which it's not terrible, but they were 21st in yards per play and 13th in touchdowns per game. That's where their season kind of fizzled out. When you're 21st in yards per play, but you're 8th in yards per game, like that doesn't add up. Goes back
to the inefficiency.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you look at what Kellen Moore was able to do with the Cowboys. He led them to number 4 in the yards per game, number 4 in points per game, number 10 in yards per game, and he was number 1 in red zone scoring offense. So I think he could hit all those numbers again, but with the Chargers and the weapons they have, and Herbert at quarterback, who I believe is a better quarterback than what's his name over in Dallas? Why am I drawing a blank now? It's late. Dak Prescott.
Dak.
To me, that's where I see him making his money with the Chargers. And again, like you said, he's got a fantastic running back, a fantastic quarterback, veteran wide receivers, plus a young rookie stud wide receiver, and a good veteran tight end. It's everything you want, and they all stay healthy. This team, should go through the roof. But that's for any team. If all stay healthy.
And a fairly solid defense. There's some really good players if Bosa stays healthy.